are talking about today was most likely born in the 16th century or first decade of the 17th century in the West Central African nation of Ndongo, which would be located in present-day Angola. Even though there were large cities in West Central Africa, she likely had a rural upbringing and experience with farming and agricultural work. Although the Portuguese had been in West Central Africa for a while, beginning heavily in the mid-1570s during a drought in the region, the Portuguese raided West Central African nations such as Ndongo. After 1580, Portugal and Spain were united under the same crown, which opened Spanish markets in the Caribbean to the Portuguese. In response to an increasing demand for cheap labor in the Caribbean, Portugal and their African allies sometimes ignited and fueled violence in West Central Africa for the purpose of capturing men and women to force into slavery and sell to the Spanish. In 1617, under new leadership, the Portuguese allied with a local West Central African raider group called the Mbangala, which allowed the Portuguese to invade the kingdom of Ndongo, sack the capital city of Cabasa, and force their leader, King Ngola Mbandi, to flee. During this attack, the Mbangala were instructed to enslave everyone they could and kill the rest. Until peace was made in 1621, many men and women were captured and enslaved this way. The woman that we are talking about today could likely have been one of the women taken captive during this time. If so, she would have faced the horrors of war and been forced to walk from Cabasa to the Atlantic Ocean, about a 130-mile trip. There, it was customary for Africans to be baptized into the Christian faith by the Portuguese, which could be where we get the only name that we know this woman by, Angelo. Angela was almost certainly not her birth name and was likely a name placed on her upon her baptism. Some historians refer to her as Angela later on, but her name is recorded with the O ending. Angelo could be a misspelling or a misunderstanding of the name Angela. Not knowing her birth name or personal preference between Angelo and Angela, we'll be calling her Angelo. We do know that in 1619 in Luanda, Angela was sold to Manuel Mendes de Cunha, captain of the Portuguese ship called the São João Batista, with around 350 other African men and women to be sent to Veracruz, New Spain, or modern-day Mexico, where she and the rest of the people captured would be enslaved by the Spanish and forced to work in brutal conditions. We know that while the São João Batista was sailing from Luanda to Veracruz, it was attacked by two privateering ships, the White Lion and the Treasurer. These ships were sailing with letters of marque from the Dutch Prince of Orange and Duke of Savoy, respectively, with the goal of making money from their privateering. During the attack, the White Lion and the Treasurer took about 50 Africans, Angelo among them, and sailed to Virginia. The São João Batista later arrived in Veracruz with 147 enslaved people, meaning about 150 died on the voyage over or during the attack by the White Lion and Treasurer. English planter John Rolfe noted sometime in late August that the White Lion and Treasurer arrived in Point Comfort, Virginia with, quote, 20 and odd, unquote, Africans who were, quote, bought for victual at the best and easiest rate they could, unquote. The fact that these men and women were bought suggests to many historians that they were treated as enslaved peoples and not indentured servants. Regardless of their status, they were not free to make their own choices and would never return home. Unlike white servants from Europe, the Africans lacked signed contracts specifying their terms of service and thus could be kept in servitude indefinitely. As England had no official laws on slavery and the Virginia Company indicated disapproval of the practice, some colonists at Jamestown may have been careful with their later testimony regarding these events. The Treasurer arrived 3 or 4 days after the White Lion. The colony's deputy governor, Sir George Yardley, sent John Rolfe and another planter named William Pierce to meet the ship, but the Treasurer had fled because his letter of marque had expired and the captain feared arrest. Later records show that the Treasurer sold 14 enslaved people in Bermuda, suggesting that it left 11 to 15 in Virginia, Angelo likely among these 11 to 15. From here, Angelo disappears from the historic record until 1624, but her presence in the Virginia colony during this time means that not only did she survive her capture in Ndongo, the Middle Passage on the voyage to Veracruz, and the attacks on the São João Batista, but she also in Virginia survived disease, starvation, and the 1622 Powhatan attack against English settlements. In March 1620, a muster, which is similar to a census, counted 32 Africans in Virginia, but only about 60%, one of whom was Angelo, remained 5 years later in 1625. When she does appear in the historic record in 1624, her name, Angelo, appears as a living person on the List of Living and Dead, which was used to document casualties in the ongoing attacks against and by the Powhatan people in prior years. The next year in 1625, Angelo appears again in the muster of the inhabitants of Virginia, and she is listed as being part of the English planter William Pierce's household, which included himself and his wife Joan, as well as Angelo and 3 European indentured servants. Angelo likely lived and worked in the Pierce household, tending to the house and garden or helping to pick figs, even though Pierce did have land outside of James City for agriculture. Whatever the nature of her work, she was one of 9 Africans living at Jamestown at the time of the muster. The fact that Angelo, an African woman, was listed in the muster alongside the other servants and named instead of just counted as many Africans were at the time is of interesting note, but the reasons for why this is the case can only be speculated about. Angelo's life after 1625 is unknown. Her date and location of death is not recorded. Even though we only know that Angelo worked in the Pierce household at least in 1625 and arrived on the Treasurer, it is important to try to paint a picture of what her life might have been like and what she endured. As excavations of the Pierce household on Jamestown Island conclude and archaeologists and other scientists begin the lengthy process of documenting and analyzing artifacts found on the site, we can hope that they find some sign of Angelo among the remnants. Unless more is found out about her, we will never know who her family was, if she was married or have children in Ndongo or later in Virginia, what she's passionate about, her favorite songs or food, her thoughts on her life in Ndongo and Virginia, her name before Angelo, or any of the many different things that make us who we are. What we do have is a name which helps her stand out and tells the story of millions of enslaved African people in history who were born and died without their story being recorded. Thank you for watching. If there are people who you would like to learn more about in the Jamestown story, please leave your suggestions in the comment section down below. We read all of them and love hearing your feedback.